This case was recommended by a subscriber, and I want to say thank you for bringing this case to my attention. I hope I can do it justice. We are heading to Bray, County Wicklow. It is the biggest town in Wicklow, and it is a coastal town situated about 20 kilometres south of Dublin City. It is known as the gateway to the Garden of Ireland and is the longest established seaside town in Ireland. On the Dublin-Wicklow border is an area called Cork Abbey, a well-established housing estate on the Dublin side of the border. Here lived the Bishop family, parents Kieran and May, and their 3 children, Gillian, Karen and brother John. Gillian was also known as Jill. She was an 18-year-old girl still living at home with her family. She worked part-time in Dublin City in a place called the RDS. The RDS is the Royal Dublin Society, and it is a members' club which was founded in 1731 as the Dublin Society, and it was granted royal patronage in 1820 by George IV. It is probably most noted for holding events like the Dublin Horse Show, concerts and exhibitions, and it is also the playground for the Leinster rugby team. Gillian had some health problems. She had suffered from arthritis for one, and she also had bad eyesight. From what I've read, Gillian was a bit of a home bird, but she had her friends and family. While she did work in Dublin City, socialising there wasn't her thing. She'd rather go out locally so she could go home afterwards and sleep in her own bed. On Halloween night in 1991, it was one of those nights. She would take her little sister Karen to Bray, to her first disco at Bray Head Hotel in County Wicklow, which has since closed down. On this night there was great excitement and Gillian got ready to go out. Even though she had been suffering a lot of pain that week from the arthritis, which was acting up due to the cold weather, she was determined to go out and not let her little sister down. Gillian borrowed a top from her friend, jeans from her sister, and her mother's leather jacket. I remember those days. The wardrobe would be full of clothes, and yet when it came to going out, you wouldn't have a stitch to wear. Gillian styled her long curly hair and left her glasses behind in favour of contact lenses. She also borrowed £10 from her dad, promising to pay it back. I hope some of you can remember going out with £10 in your pocket and still having a good night. I remember going to discos back in the mid-80s and early 90s. It was £5 to get in. It included dinner and dessert, and you'd have to buy your own soft drinks. Yes, I did not drink back then. Gillian and Karen were finally set. They said goodbye to their parents. A kiss, a hug and an I love you. Unfortunately, only one of them would return home the next morning. When they arrived at the disco, it was packed, but they all stayed together and had a great night. During the night, Gillian would meet a young man, 23-year-old Michael Dean McLaughlin. He was well dressed, handsome and from Bray. Gillian had never met him before this night and she was smitten. She wasn't the type to date and she had never been in a relationship to this point. They danced all night and chatted, and when it came to walking home, they all went together. This was only about a 4.5 kilometre walk, which was nothing back then, especially when you'd be walking with your friends chatting about the night's events. Michael decided to walk with them. Karen and her friends walked ahead to give Gillian and Michael their space, not to be playing gooseberry. This would be a natural thing to do back then. Karen arrived home around 3:30 a.m. At the time they were told to be in by their mother, but 2 hours later there was still no sign of Gillian. Soon every parent's worst nightmare would be realised. It was raining and being the end of October, it was late before daylight arrived. Frantic with worry, Mr. Bishop went to report Gillian missing. At this stage, Mrs. Bishop had a gut feeling Gillian was dead, but her husband tried to calm her. After all, he reasoned, murders were very rare in Ireland. Mrs. Bishop unfortunately had been right. Later that same morning, on the 1st of November, Gillian's body would be found by a boy who went to retrieve his football that had gone over the garden wall of a house near the seafront. On a side note, in 2007, the singer Sinead O'Connor purchased this same house, unknowing of its dark past, but has since sold it in 2021. The boy came upon the naked and beaten body of poor Gillian. The Gardaí arrived and soon the area was sealed off. Gillian's parents were notified straight away, and Gillian's body was taken to hospital for a post-mortem. An investigation began and McLaughlin was picked up and brought to Bray Garda station for questioning. On the same day he was brought in, Karen, Gillian's sister, was also there to give a statement, but she was made wait outside the station in a Garda car. This was the beginning of how the family would be treated in comparison to the perpetrator, which we will go into later. When the post-mortem was carried out on Gillian, it was discovered that she had been beaten to death. Boot marks were found on her stomach and her face was so badly beaten that they wouldn't let the family see her. She had gashes on her head and a £1 coin pushed down her throat to silence her screams. One of Gillian's contact lenses was knocked out in the attack, so this would have left her partially blind without it in the darkness. This would haunt the family for years. £3.78 was found in Gillian's pocket, and this was returned to her father. I have to say, this really got to me. Gillian had a great night out with her sister, cousins and friends, and still didn't manage to spend the full £10. Mrs. Bishop said that if she had seen Gillian's body, it would have been more accepting in her mind that she was really gone. She said, "They didn't have to let me see her full body. I am her mother. I would know my own child's hand. And now I still expect her to walk in the door because I never got to see that she is truly gone." When they arrived at the hospital, her coffin was already closed. This was hospital policy at the time. McLaughlin was charged with manslaughter, released, re-arrested, charged with murder and held on remand. The trial was held the following May and it would last for 4 days. McLaughlin pleaded not guilty, and this was very hard on the family, as they had to go through hearing what this monster did to their child and listen to the defence trying to sully poor Gillian's character. Her father would say Gillian was quiet, and that night McLaughlin took an interest in her, would have been her first real intro to a man. She hadn't gone out with anyone before. She used to hang around with 5 or 6 girlfriends. They used to go out in packs. There was never any real romance in her life. But in the end they got justice. McLaughlin was found guilty of murder and received a life sentence. Of course an appeal was put forward and denied. He now, though, would be eligible for parole after 7 years and every 2 years after that. The family had to go through the ordeal of writing letters to the parole board as to why McLaughlin should not be released, and in turn McLaughlin had to state why he should be released. He got to see the Bishop family's letters, but they did not get to see his. They also were not allowed to be present at the parole board meeting. This system is still in place today, except for the 7 years is now 12 years as of 2019. In July 2017, the Bishop family received word from the prison liaison officer through a text message that McLaughlin was being released the following day after serving 26 years in prison. Imagine getting a text with that kind of news. As Mr. Bishop said, you text your friends. You don't receive life-changing information about your daughter's killer through a text message. The text read as follows. As previously discussed at the end of May, McLaughlin will be going on weekly, reviewable temporary release from tomorrow afternoon, with conditions attached under supervision of the probation service. Not entering Bray remains one of his conditions. One of his other conditions will come into play later on. He had to sign on at Mountjoy Prison every week, which will become crucial in what was to happen next after his release. Another humdinger that was dropped on the family when they were informed of McLaughlin's release. No picture of what he looked like was to be released to the family or to the public. Of course they requested one, as they had no idea what he looked like, as the last time they saw him he was 23 years old. Now he's a 49-year-old man. The family were refused a photograph under the Data Protection Act. So here we are again. The perpetrators have more rights than the victims and their family. I mean, the family could be standing beside him on the street or sitting on a bus. He could be in Bray breaking his probation conditions and they'd have no idea. The mind absolutely boggles at this. But the Irish media were on the case, and a year later the Herald newspaper published an image of McLaughlin, and finally the family knew what he looked like. They photographed him coming out of Mountjoy prison after one of his sign-in conditions. This was amazing to the family. Just one little nugget of information was so helpful to them. At least now they knew who to look out for. This photograph, though, would become bigger than anyone could imagine, even for McLaughlin. It would seal his fate. I can hardly contain myself telling you all what happened next. You see, McLaughlin was recognised by someone that worked in a cafe in Dublin city centre, an 18-year-old girl who had a tale to tell. She did not realise who McLaughlin was until the picture was published. He would over a period of months make approaches to this young cafe worker. She said she would frequently get older men making comments like, "If I was 20 years younger," which was harmless banter, said the teen. But McLaughlin was different. There was something weird about him. It wasn't just casual conversation. It was like, "What do you do? What are your hobbies? Where do you go to college? And even where do you live?" She went to her manager at the cafe and she was told she didn't have to serve him anymore. Then about 2 weeks later, he was sitting in the lobby area and he called her over and gave her a piece of paper saying he didn't want to make her uncomfortable by giving his number to her, but asked her to call him. McLaughlin persisted and even gave the girl a card at Easter. The teen then noticed that she was spotting McLaughlin in other places such as the city centre, where he would approach her and shake her hand and try to initiate conversation. After the girl told her father that she recognised McLaughlin in the newspaper as the man that was basically stalking her, her father went to the Gardaí. On next sign-in day, McLaughlin was put back in prison and has been sitting there since. Out less than a year and he was already lining up his next victim. He did apply for parole again in 2021, but it was denied. This would be his 10th denial. So that's enough about that scumbag. He is rotting behind bars, and hopefully for everyone's sake, they'll throw away the key for once. Back to the lovely family, the Bishops. The Bishops set up a support group in honour of Gillian. It's called the Jill Project. It is for the families of victims. Kieran said he is campaigning for greater support for the families of victims. He is lobbying government bodies to put families first. He says at the moment nobody cares about you. No social worker will come to your home to ask if you need help. If you need financial aid, no one tells you how to go about getting it. No one will ask you your opinion when they decide to give the person responsible remission. When someone wakes up on a cold morning and needs someone to talk to, I want to make sure they have someone to ring. It's not that he is an expert, but a listening post. I can tell them they are not going mad and there is no right way to grieve. If you want to go to the grave 10 times a day, then go. If you cry at the drop of a hat, it's all right. If you want to scream from the top of a mountain, it's your privilege. If you want to talk about the person you have lost at every opportunity, it is perfectly normal. I have one final word from Gillian's father, which I think is just lovely. Her farewell was the best we could get. She gave us a big kiss and hug and told us she loved us. She was always doing that. If there was anything to learn from it all, it is that you should never leave things unsaid. Life is too short.